Hello and welcome to Trade Finance Talks. My name's Depesh Patel, editor at Trade Finance Global. We're here today at the BAFT Europe Bank to Bank Forum, the 24th to the 25th of January, discussing the topic of a new era of challenges and opportunities facing the banking industry in 2023. I think it's fair to say we've had a tumultuous and uncertain few years, and I'm sure 2023 will bring its own unique set of challenges. But of course, with these challenges come new exciting opportunities to adopt new technologies in trade, and collectively, these can take a step towards a sustainable future and spread the benefits of digitized international trade and trade finance. So today we're talking about how we can accomplish these goals, and with the help of UNCITRAL and the model law on electronic transferable records, I think there's some really exciting opportunities for headwinds. And I'm delighted to be joined by Luca Castellini, joining us from Vienna, Austria, who works at UNCITRAL. Luca, thank you very much for joining us on Trade Finance Talks TV.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure.
Likewise. So, quick introduction in no more than 30 seconds or so. Who are you? Where are you from? And what do you do?
I am from Italy. I studied mostly comparative law, private comparative law, international law. I started my career both teaching and practicing in a small law firm in Torino, Italy. Then I joined some 20 years ago the Office of Legal Affairs of the Secretariat of the United Nations. And I did different things in the last 20 years, but most of the time I was with the Secretariat of the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, which is, as you said, based here in Vienna, Austria. And of course, I'm very happy to talk to you. But you will get my personal views. These will not be the official views of UNCITRAL or of the United Nations. I hope you'll be happy with that.
Sure, absolutely. So let's go into a bit more detail on the model law on electronic transferable records, or MLETR, or MLETR for short, which was created by UNCITRAL, I think, in 2017. Can you outline the impact on this and what it's had on international trade since its introduction?
Of course. MLETR, we all like this name. It's a very nice name. As you said, now she's at 6. She was adopted in 2017. MLETR came to address a specific problem, which is the possibility to use in electronic form what we call transferable documents and instruments. These are documents and instruments that traditionally incorporate in the paper the possibility to ask for the payment of a sum of money or the delivery of goods. So we're talking bills of exchange, bills of lading, warehouse receipts, promissory notes, so on and so forth, checks. There were attempts to address this issue before, especially for bills of lading. But for different reasons, they didn't go as expected. And I have to say that MLETR came at the right time because it came just before the pandemic. And therefore, the need to complete the digitizations of trade documents became even more evident because there was a real urge to get over paper. And that triggered a new vision that moves from the multiple trade documents. When I say trade documents, I mean commercial, but also things like customs declaration, which are trade related, to looking at information, at data, which is in a single source and then is shared with stakeholders, which is quite a transformative.
Sure. So MLETR is currently being used in numerous markets since its inception in 2017. I think Bahrain, Singapore, Abu Dhabi global markets. Can you talk about what actually happened and also whether we can see an impact this has had on some of those electronic trade documents that you mentioned?
Yep. MLETR currently is enforced in 7 jurisdictions. the ones you mentioned, and then some minor ones. But the ones you mentioned are important because they are trailblazers. They are highly innovative. What is even more important is that MLETR has been endorsed twice by the G7. We know there's a bill in Parliament in the UK. We know that Germany has already adopted some of it. The US has already adopted some of it. So we see movement beyond the 7 jurisdictions that are listed so far. I believe that we have to look at the practical impact, not only at the law in the books, not only at where it has been enacted. And we see some really interesting applications. I would like here to for instance, point at e-check in Bahrain. It was an issue in the country. There was a real need to have digital checks, which would be, however, endorsable. So that's the big difference with other electronic checks, which are just payment orders. And there was a solution that was developed locally, and now all major banks are offering that to their clients, and everyone can issue a check with an app in the cell phone and can send it around and endorse it, and then present it, cash it. So that's quite something, and it exists and it works every day, and it works very well. With Singapore, we see issuance of electronic bills of lading, purely electronic. They just exist online, and which are bill of lading just like the paper-based ones. They can be opposed to third parties. And there are providers that have reported that they went live with that. So in reality, for those who want to already embrace transformation, the solutions are there and they are tested. They exist. It's just a matter of putting together the business case, the technology, and the law.
Thank you very much. And what potential legal or regulatory problems do you foresee with implementing the MLETR in jurisdictions across the world? Because obviously, as we said, it hasn't been adopted everywhere yet.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with you on the yet. Well, there's the commercial law side, or what we call the enabling side. That is to say, when it comes to maritime law, or the law of promissory notes for bills of exchange, MLETR takes care of things. And I would like to stress, MLETR comes as a development of prior ancestral texts in this field. And these ancestral texts have already been adopted in more than 100 states. So the approach and the fundamental principles have already been tested in 100 states, but not with respect to electronic transfer records until MLETR came. But for regular transactions, yes. So that part is taken care of. It's really important, and I totally agree with you, to take care now also of regulation. So for instance, I have a bill of lading, but will customs accept it? I have a bill of lading and I use it as a collateral for trade financing. Will the monetary authority confirm that the capital requirements are the same or even less than for paper bills of lading? Because in reality, I can make a case where electronic bills of lading are more secure. So I could reduce the capital requirement. But I have to engage the monetary authority to make that case. And of course, this is better done collectively than individually. MLETR and ancestral in general, they do not deal with regulation, but if we want to see widespread MLETR adoption, we have to cross that line and engage the regulators in each field.
Yeah, sure. Well, let's talk about one use case, which I guess is quite notable, is the UK, because from what I'm aware, it's been adopted and also handled quite differently to some of those other markets. Can you talk about the process for the adoption of MLETR or equivalent in the UK under English common law?
Well, I can talk about it from the ancestral perspective. It is to say, the UK had the huge merit of bringing this to the attention of the G7 for the first time. So the first endorsement was under the British presidency and the second one under the German presidency. And then, of course, the UK looked carefully at MLETR, the Law Commission of England and Wales did that. But of course, English law has its own features, and it has a very well-established tradition. So there was the need to make some changes. This led to drafting the bill, which is the Electronic Trade Documents Bill, now which is in the House of Lords, and the public consultation just finished, so there may still be room for adjustment. My understanding at this early stage is that there were some, I would not say concerns, but there was some interest in adopting a slightly different notion of control, in part also because of expected legislation on digital assets. But this is something that would fit English law. I don't know to what extent it may fit under other common law jurisdictions, but I think this could pose problems, for instance, in civil law jurisdictions. While UNCITRAL has to prepare laws which are of universal application. So we could not go down that narrow road. But what is really important and what I really appreciate is other fundamental principles like technology neutrality are fully respected in this bill. And that makes sure that whatever is issued under the act, when it will be an act, it could have legal effect also outside the UK. And there could be some mutual legal recognition between documents issued under any British Act and documents issued under the law of a jurisdiction that has enacted MLETR. This is something that also the G7 has stressed. Mutual legal recognition, by the way, is the key to technical interoperability. And since nobody wants to have data silos, then we have to go that way. So I would say there are differences, but of course we have to wait for the final text. But there is also keen awareness that the differences will be limited to what is required by the English legal tradition, but the fundamental principles will be the same, so that there will be this legal and technical interoperability, if I may say so.
Yeah, thanks, Luca. And I'm sure that, once this act passes into English law, for the very reasons you mentioned, other countries will follow suit. So you mentioned it's passed through the House of Lords, it's gone through public consultation. What's next for the UK to drive this forward, and what's the next milestone?
I think it's still in the House of Lords, but it had a public consultation. But this process is public, so and it's also time sensitive. So by the time that people will listen to us, maybe it will be already forward. What is really important and what I really appreciate is that I see that users are lining up, that concerned stakeholders like banks are already informing their clients of this possibility, and those who want to be, early adopters are already thinking about using that. Of course, once this is done, there will be the need to adjust existing trade practices. There will be the need to adjust even contractual frameworks. But then the train has left the station. And then it will just be a race to jump on it at the next station. Because of the importance of English law in this field, that could give another push towards actual implementation. It's difficult and it's wrong to try to predict things, but under US law, electronic transfer of records can be issued since some time. But in certain areas like warehouse receipts were very broadly used, but in other areas like bills of lading were not. So there's a lot of conditions here, and the fulfillment of each of them is necessary but not sufficient. So let's look at this enactment in English law as another milestone towards the final goal but let's also keep the eyes open to see what else is needed.
Sure, thank you very much. And I guess, going wider afield, Luca, how can governments and policymakers continue to support this kind of trade digitalization?
First of all, of course, they should adopt the enabling law. Secondly, they should take care of regulation, as I said before. Here, we can learn something from the European Union. There's two pieces of European legislation that are important for MLETR implementation. One is EIDAS, because EIDAS gives a common framework and also one which operates in the whole EU automatically for trusted services, including electronic signatures, which means that we have a way there to validate data quality across borders. And UNCITRAL has just adopted the model law on the use and cross-border recognition of identity management and trust services, which expands EIDAS beyond the EU. So that could be an interesting way to complement MLETR when it comes to recognition, as I said, of data quality. And the other one is the EFTI regulation, electronic freight transport information, that mandates public entities to accept the submission of information in electronic form in the EU. What that means for us, for instance, is that if I have a bill of lading, I can extract data if it's electronic, and I can use it for a customs declaration. Now, you may appreciate what that means, because this means data of best quality.
Yeah.
So with a single source. So when it comes to being complete, being authentic, being up to date, so that's quite something.
Yeah, absolutely. So EIDAS and EFTI regulations. Once the law changes, what does this actually mean, Luca, for traders, banks, and corporates? Are we going to suddenly turn on the taps and all traders paperless?
Well, there are the obvious advantages like environmental impact, no more trade paper, or speed, because now in many areas, we were at the launch of the process of adoption of MLETR in France last week, and someone said we have supply chain from Morocco to France, and regularly the ship comes way before the bill of lading. So and that's costly, and so we don't want to see that anymore. But I would like to, again, to see this in the bigger picture, which means once we transition from paper to electronic, we are transitioning to a broader approach where we can reuse and analyze data, which means, for instance, lower compliance costs, easier access to credit of SMEs. I would say real-time monitoring of supply chain and logistics, with more information available from multiple sources. And one thing that should be a winner, especially because here we are talking on the occasion of BAFT, I would like to stress the importance that validation from data, especially data generated by objects, could have for preventing documentary fraud. Because then, I can say, yes, the cargo is there. Yes, it's on the ship. Yes, it's in the warehouse. Yes, the cargo has not been given as a collateral to anyone else. These are all things that are technologically possible. We have, of course, to think of common standards and common ways of sharing information.
Yeah, I absolutely can agree with you more. I think there's the fraud piece, but then there's also the reduction of other errors, human errors, process errors, etc. through entering multiple sources, entering data into multiple sources rather than just having one single truth of the data. Luca, final question for you. What's your advice for banks or corporates looking to integrate digitalization technologies into their trade and supply chain processes in 2023?
Just 4 words: Think data, not documents. That's all. Think data, not documents.
Think data, not documents. I didn't think you'd be able to do that in 4 words, but excellent job. Luca, thank you very much for joining us at the BAFT Europe Bank to Bank Forum. It's been such a pleasure having you and discussing all things with regards to the UNCITRAL MLETR. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.